26th, the lamp is still on, even though it's late. Its light pools on the table, soft and yellow, touching the edge of my prayer covering where I set it down too carefully. The house smells like wood smoke and soap. I can hear his boots on the porch, the familiar pause before the door opens. My hands are folded in my apron, but they won't stop tightening. I remember thinking how ordinary everything looked, how quiet. What I didn't know yet was that the next sentence I spoke would change the way I was seen forever. My name is Sarah. This channel is a place for the stories Amish women rarely say out loud, not to accuse, not to shock, but to tell the truth gently. If you've ever carried a sentence inside you for too long, stay with me. You're welcome to subscribe and tell me in the comments. Have you ever held something unsaid? I don't know exactly when I began holding the sentence inside me. That's the strange part. There was no clear beginning. It didn't arrive all at once. It settled, like a small stone placed in the pocket of my chest that I kept forgetting about until I moved the wrong way. Some days I hardly felt it. Other days, pressed so hard I had to sit very still to keep my breathing even. I had learned how to do that early. Stillness was not new to me. Silence was not new. What was new was the weight, the feeling that something I was carrying no longer belonged there. I was raised to believe that yielding was not weakness. It was strength shaped inward. We called it Gelassenheit, but to me it felt like steadiness, a way of keeping the world from splintering. As a girl, I watched the women around me move through their days with quiet competence, hands busy, voices low, no wasted motion. I wanted to be like that. I wanted to be the kind of woman whose presence calmed a room without asking for attention. When I married, I didn't feel trapped by that role. I felt chosen by it. I stepped into it willingly, believing that disappearing a little was the same thing as loving well. My husband was not unkind. That matters. I need you to know that. He was shaped by the same rules I was, taught the same order of things. There were moments, small, ordinary ones, when I felt deeply known by him. The way he set my cup closer to the stove so it wouldn't cool too fast. The way he noticed when I was tired without my saying so. These were not empty gestures. They were real. And because of that, it never occurred to me that something could be wrong. You don't question water when you've always lived inside it. Something shifted in the year before I spoke. I didn't have words for it then. I only knew that certain moments began to land differently. Things I had accepted without noticing suddenly felt heavier, like carrying a full bucket instead of an empty one. I didn't think this is wrong. I thought this is harder than it used to be. That felt safer. I told myself I was tired or ungrateful or failing at something I had once done well. The sentence stayed tucked away, quiet, waiting. I still believed that if I ignored it long enough, it would soften. It did not. In our world, obedience isn't loud. It doesn't come with punishment or shouting. It comes with structure. A wife who questions doesn't cause a scene. She causes concern. She becomes a problem to be gently corrected. I had seen that happen, not to many women, but enough to learn. The word disobedient didn't mean rebellion. It meant you had stopped vanishing properly. It meant you were visible in a way that made others uneasy. I had no desire to be that kind of woman. I had learned early that peace was kept by staying slightly out of the way. There was an older woman in our community. I will call her my aunt, though she wasn't by blood. When I was young, she said something once that her husband hadn't expected. Nothing sharp, nothing cruel, just a truth spoken plainly. I remember how the room changed after that, not all at once, slowly, over time. People checked on her more, offered help she hadn't asked for, corrected her gently when she spoke too directly. They loved her back into silence. At the time, I thought that was kindness. I filed that memory away without knowing why. Years later, it came back to me with a weight I couldn't set down. The moment that made the sentence necessary wasn't a fight. That's important too. It was something quieter, something small. I remember my hands going still around the thing I was holding. I remember setting it down. I remember the feeling that if I didn't speak soon, I might never speak at all. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid of who I would become if I kept agreeing to something I no longer could carry. That fear felt heavier than the rules I had lived by my whole life. He looked at me, waiting, unaware of what was forming. That night I lay in bed listening to his breathing. The house was dark, familiar, safe. I counted the space between breaths the way I had counted stitches in my sewing when my mind needed calming. I went over the reasons not to speak. They were many. Good reasons, holy reasons. But somewhere in the dark, I realized I had stopped arguing with myself about whether I would say it. That question was already answered. The only question left, the one that kept me awake until morning, was what it would cost me once I did. Morning came without ceremony. Pale light slid through the window and rested on the floor like it always did. I moved through breakfast by memory alone, the kettle, the cups. The sound of grain poured steady and dull. My body knew the order even while my mind stayed somewhere else, balanced on the edge of what I had already decided. He sat where he always sat. I stood where I always stood. Nothing in the room knew what was coming. That ordinariness made my chest ache. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so unchanged while something inside me had already crossed a line it could not step back over. I spoke while my hands were busy. That mattered. It kept my voice steady. I didn't raise it. I didn't soften it either. I said, I need to say no to this. That was the sentence, not a speech, not an accusation, just that. I named my own need. I claimed it out loud. The words didn't echo. They didn't demand attention. They simply existed in the space between us, quiet and undeniable. The moment after felt longer than the moment before. I kept my eyes on the table, waiting for the weight of it to land, wondering if the floor beneath my feet would still hold. He didn't respond right away. His face changed, but not the way I had imagined in all those nights of rehearsal. There was no anger. There was confusion, and beneath that, something like grief, as if he were trying to understand a language he had never been taught to hear. I realized then that the system had failed us both. He had been prepared for a wife who yielded without naming herself. I had been prepared to be that wife. Neither of us had been given instructions for this moment. He asked a question. I answered it honestly. The room stayed quiet. That quiet was different. It didn't feel empty anymore. In the days that followed, nothing dramatic happened. That was almost worse. The world didn't end, but it tilted. I felt it in small ways, in how I stood, in how I spoke, in how others looked at me a second longer than before. An older woman mentioned the importance of peace in the home, her voice gentle, her meaning clear. I nodded. I understood the language. I had spoken it my whole life, but now, hearing it, something in me shifted. I wasn't angry. I was aware. Awareness changes how things land. Once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. I thought of my aunt then, the woman from my childhood. I saw her differently now. I saw how carefully the community had guided her back into quiet, how loving it had been, how effective. And I understood that I had done the same thing to myself for years without being asked. I had believed yielding was love because it had been taught to me that way, and because it often felt that way. Both things were true. The love had been real. The cost had been real, too. Realizing that didn't make me bitter. It made me grieve the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming at the same time. If you have ever held a sentence inside you this long, not because you were afraid of someone, but because you were afraid of becoming someone you had no name for, then you already know what that space feels like. It's quiet, it's heavy, and it asks something of you eventually. If this story is finding you there right now, stay with me. This channel exists for moments like this, for truths that need witnesses before they can fully exist. You're not alone in this listening, and you don't have to rush what comes next. The word came later. Disobedient. It wasn't thrown at me. It arrived gently, almost carefully, as if no one wanted to bruise me with it. I had feared that word for weeks. I expected it to wound me deeply. But one morning, standing at the same sink, looking out the same window, I realized it no longer did. I wasn't certain I had done the right thing. I still am not, but I was certain for the first time that I had done a real thing, something that belonged to me. That knowledge settled quietly, like a hand resting on my back. I still live in the same house. I still move through the same rooms. The lamp still casts the same light on the table at night, but I sit differently in that space now, not louder, not harder. Just present. The room didn't change. I did. And if you are listening from inside your own quiet kitchen, holding a sentence you don't yet know how to say. I want you to hear this. You are not disobedient for knowing what you know. You are simply awake.